A humble kindergarten teacher helped a little girl who was crying after school without knowing that the child's father was a widowed billionaire CEO. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon at Maplewood Kindergarten in suburban Seattle. The golden light of late autumn filtered through the windows, casting warm shadows over the tiny chairs, lockers, and walls covered in colorful crafts. Angela Evans, 28 years old, stood by the art corner, tidying up the watercolor palettes left from that morning's painting session. Her soft honey blonde curls were loosely tied back. Her face glowed with the quiet joy of someone who truly loved her job. Outside, most parents had already picked up their kids. The usual after-class chatter had faded into silence. All except for one small sound, a soft sob. Angela turned quickly and saw a tiny figure in the far corner of the classroom, curled up near the reading rug, in a pink dress, clutching a worn teddy bear tightly to her chest. "Rosie," Angela said gently, approaching. The girl didn't look up. Her golden curls, tied in two pigtails, shook as she cried quietly. Angela knelt beside her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Rosie sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her sleeve. "Daddy's late," she whispered, eyes still down. Angela's heart ached. "Maybe he's just running behind," she said softly. "Let's wait together, okay?" Rosie nodded slightly. Angela led her to the teacher's lounge, a cozy, quiet space with bookshelves, a small couch, and a softly humming kettle in the corner. She poured a cup of warm milk into a child-sized mug and added a drizzle of honey. Rosie sat on the couch, legs tucked up, still hugging her teddy. Angela handed her the mug. "This always made me feel better when I was little." "Did your daddy forget you too?" Rosie asked, eyes wide. Angela smiled sadly. "No, but sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. That doesn't mean they don't love you." She sat beside the girl and began humming a soft lullaby, running her fingers through the child's soft curls. Slowly, Rosie's breathing calmed. Her eyes closed. Outside, clouds gathered. In minutes, the first raindrops pattered against the windows. Then they fell in steady sheets. The sound filled the quiet room, peaceful and rhythmic. Time passed, the sky darkened. Then hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. Angela looked up just as the door burst open. A tall man stood in the doorway, drenched from rain, his dark suit slightly clinging to him. He looked composed, but his eyes scanned the room urgently until they landed on the small figure sleeping peacefully on the couch. "Rosie," exhaled. Angela stood instinctively. The man stepped forward. "I'm sorry I lost track of time. A meeting ran long." Angela nodded politely. "She's fine, just a bit worried and tired." His eyes lingered on his daughter, then shifted to Angela. "I appreciate you staying with her," he said, his voice concise but not unkind. "Thank you." There was a pause. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "I'm James. James Alden." Angela blinked. She recognized the name, James Alden, CEO of Alden Tech, Billionaire. Reclusive, the man who'd become even more of a mystery after his wife's death the previous year. "I'm Angela Evans," she replied softly. "I'm Rosie's classroom teacher." James nodded. He approached and carefully scooped Rosie into his arms, trying not to wake her. She stirred slightly, her arms instinctively wrapping around his neck. Angela watched the tenderness in his movements, surprising, given his reserved demeanor. Just as he turned to leave, he glanced back. Angela stood near the couch, arms lightly crossed, a kind expression on her face. Behind her, the rain framed her figure in a soft gray light. Rosie's small pink blanket was still draped over the cushion where she'd slept. James hesitated. His eyes met Angela's. No words were exchanged, just a brief, vulnerable glance of quiet gratitude, confusion, and something more he couldn't yet name. He nodded once. Angela nodded back, and with that, the door closed behind him. But in the silence that followed, with the rain still falling and the warmth of a little girl's presence lingering on the couch, something new had begun to take root. Something neither of them expected. James Alden was a man known by many titles, visionary, genius, billionaire, but few knew the silent grief he carried behind those impeccable suits and executive eyes. Since the day his wife died in a car accident a year ago, he'd grown even more withdrawn, his life shrinking into a routine of long hours, closed doors, and empty victories. In public, he stayed composed. In private, he crumbled slowly. Rosie, just 3 when it happened, had cried for weeks before her young mind shielded itself with silence. Since then, she'd lived mostly under the care of a rotating team of nannies and drivers. James thought it was for the best. He didn't know how to be a father and a breaking man at the same time. He tried to love her from afar, expensive toys, the best doctors, private ballet classes, but none of it brought the light back to her eyes. Until she met Miss Angela. James noticed the change one Tuesday morning. Rosie insisted on carrying a folded piece of paper in her little backpack, guarding it like treasure. Her nanny said she'd stayed up late coloring it. That night, James came home later than usual. As he entered Rosie's room, she held up the paper with an excitement he hadn't seen in months. "It's for Miss Angela," she said, her voice brighter than he remembered. "Can I give it to her tomorrow?" James looked at the drawing. It was messy but clear, 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. One labeled me, another Miss Angela, and the last with a question mark. "She makes me happy," Rosie added. "Can I go early tomorrow, please?" James stared at her, then nodded. The next morning, he drove her to school himself. An unusual break in his routine. He stood by the classroom door, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding the fatigue in his eyes. Inside, Angela Evans was kneeling with a group of kids, helping them stack blocks. She looked up as Rosie ran to her. "Miss Angela, I drew something for you." Rosie shouted, her pink backpack bouncing. Angela took the drawing with delight. "This is beautiful, Rosie." "That's me," Rosie said, smiling warmly. Rosie nodded, her pigtails bobbing. "And who's this?" Angela asked, pointing to the third figure. "It's my daddy," Rosie whispered, "but he's always busy." Angela's smile softened. She gave Rosie a quick hug. James, still at the door, heard every word. For a moment, something twisted in his chest. Angela looked up and noticed him. "Mr. Alden," she greeted, walking over with a calm presence that unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Rosie insisted, he said. She had something important to deliver. "Well, I'm glad she did." "She's quite the little artist," Angela replied. He nodded politely, already turning to leave. "Oh," she added, "this Saturday we're having a class picnic. Parents are welcome." James raised an eyebrow. "I don't usually attend school events." Angela smiled. "You'd be surprised how much it means to them." Rosie looked up at him with big, hopeful eyes. He hesitated. "I'll consider it," he murmured. Saturday came quicker than expected. He took too long choosing what to wear. He arrived late, but Rosie's face lit up the moment she saw him, and suddenly he didn't care who was watching. Angela was leading a group activity under the shade of a large oak tree. She looked radiant in a simple summer dress, her golden curls half pinned back. Rosie pulled him over. They sat on a picnic blanket, watching the kids play. For a moment, the silence sat comfortably between them. Then Rosie tripped, scraping her knee. She burst into tears and ran into Angela's arms. Angela gently cleaned off the dirt, holding Rosie close. Her voice was soft but clear. "Your daddy loves you so much, Rosie. Sometimes grown-ups forget how to show it, but that doesn't mean they don't feel it with all their heart." James froze. Those simple words touched something deep inside him. He looked at Angela, who still held his daughter with such tenderness, it tightened his throat. He turned slightly, pretending to check his phone, hiding the shift in his expression. Something within him had begun to stir. It was a warm, golden Saturday morning when Maplewood Kindergarten held its annual picnic at the lakeside park. Sunlight filtered through the tall trees. Laughter echoed across the grass, and the scent of fresh dough and paint floated in the air. Parents gathered with their kids for a day of outdoor fun. There were ring tosses, ceramic animal painting, and the most popular station of all, the cookie-making table under a big oak tree. Angela Evans was there, sleeves rolled up, gently helping the little ones scoop and shape dough into stars, animals, and hearts. Her golden curls were loosely tied back, her smile calm and reassuring as always. A familiar voice rang out across the park. "Daddy, help me, please." Rosie shouted, tugging James Alden's hand, practically dragging him to the cookie station. James looked unsure, out of his element in this casual setting, standing back from the crowd. Angela looked up and smiled. "Mr. Alden," she greeted warmly. "Right on time. We're short one head chef." She held up a small apron, hands dusted with flour. "This is today's official uniform. Hope you're ready." James chuckled awkwardly but took it, slipping it over his crisp polo. "I've never made cookies before," he admitted. "There's a first time for everything," Angela replied. "Rosie's an excellent teacher." They started kneading together. Rosie giggled as she shaped hers into a lopsided heart. She placed it carefully on the tray, but slipped from her fingers and broke in two. Her smile faded. I ruined it. Angela knelt beside her and gently picked up the pieces. It's not ruined, she said softly. She pieced the heart back together and used a bit of icing to seal the crack. See this, she whispered. Sometimes broken things become even more special if we don't give up on them. Rosie's eyes lit up. Really? Angela nodded. Really. James watched in silence. Something in Angela's voice stirred something deeply buried within him. Without a word, he reached for a clear cookie bag and gently placed the mended heart inside. Then, grabbing a purple marker, he wrote a single word on the label. Hope. Angela looked at the word, then at him. Their eyes met. No words, just a shared moment that felt deeper than it should. He gave her a small nod. She returned it. The corners of her mouth softened. Rosie held the bag like treasure, her face beaming. Thank you, Miss Angela. Thank you, Daddy. James leaned back, looking at them both. Angela wasn't just a good teacher. She was someone who understood how to fix things that weren't just broken on the outside. And for the first time, he felt something shifting, not in the world around him, but within himself. It wasn't the cookie that moved him. It was the quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, someone was helping him do what no amount of success or money could achieve. She was helping him heal his daughter's heart, and somehow his own. After the picnic, something changed in Rosie. She became more cheerful, more affectionate, more alive. Every day, she talked about Miss Angela, what she wore, the story she read, how she smiled when Rosie got an answer right. Her drawings were now filled with rainbows, hearts, and one constant figure, a woman with long, wavy blonde hair. She named her dolls after Angela. James noticed, of course. How could he not? But he told himself it was just a phase, a sweet attachment that would fade. Deep down, though, he knew it wasn't. Then one Wednesday morning, Rosie woke up with flushed cheeks and heavy eyelids. The nanny called James at work. She's got a bit of a fever, nothing serious, but she won't eat and refuses her medicine. James rushed home and sat on the edge of Rosie's bed, medicine bottle in hand. Come on, sweetie, just one spoonful. Okay. She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. Only if Miss Angela says it's okay. Frustrated but worried, James called Angela. She picked up quickly. Mr. Alden, it's James, he corrected. Rosie's sick. I've tried everything. She won't take her medicine unless you say something. Angela paused, then gently offered instructions over the phone, but even as she spoke, James heard a soft cry in the background. Daddy, please, can Miss Angela come? James hesitated, then sighed. Angela, if you're not too busy, could you come by for a moment? I'll be there in 20 minutes. She arrived with a tote bag holding oranges, a small jar of honey, 2 homemade cookies, and Rosie's favorite storybook. Her mere presence seemed to bring down the girl's fever. Rosie perked up enough to sip a full glass of warm lemon water and curl up in Angela's lap. James watched from the kitchen doorway, silent, grateful, and in awe. Later, as Rosie drifted off on the couch, breathing slow and deep, Angela stood and stretched gently. I think she'll be okay. Just needs rest. Thank you, James said. Angela nodded. Where's the bathroom? Down the hall, second door. She walked quietly, her steps light on the wooden floor, but as she passed a room with the door slightly ajar, something caught her eye. She paused. Inside was James's study, the powerful CEO, in his impeccable suit. He was alone, hunched over a worn leather notebook. On the desk were scattered papers, framed photos, and a delicate perfume bottle gathering dust. Angela took one step closer. The notebook was open. On its yellowed pages were delicate handwritten lines, his late wife's script. Angela hadn't meant to read, but her eyes caught underlined phrases. Rosie loves when James does the Winnie the Pooh voice. If anything happens to me, please tell her I loved her every day. James isn't perfect, but he's the kind of man who'll fight for his daughter with everything he's got. Angela stood still. Her heart ached, not with pity, but with the overwhelming tenderness of witnessing something so private, so raw. She didn't speak, didn't knock. Instead, she softly closed the door and left him alone with his grief. In the days that followed, James started showing up more often. He lingered after school. He asked deeper questions, not just about Rosie's progress, but about Angela's life. One afternoon, he asked, "You're so good with kids. Have you ever wanted your own?" Angela smiled softly. "Yes. I lost my mom when I was 6. My dad raised me with books and bedtime stories, but I missed having a woman's hand to hold. Maybe that's why I try to be that for my students." James didn't respond, but in his silence was understanding and admiration. Meanwhile, Rosie glowed. She sang more, danced more, laughed more. One afternoon, as James drove her home from school, she rested her head on his shoulder in the back seat and whispered, "Daddy, I wish Miss Angela was my mommy. Then I'd get a good night kiss every night." James felt something break inside him. He didn't speak, just pulled her close, held her tight, and stared out the windshield as tears slowly filled his eyes. Not from pain, not from the past, but because he finally saw a future. The warmth that had been building steadily between James and Angela began to tremble under the weight of his doubts. He couldn't deny it. He felt something. It was more than gratitude or admiration. It was the quiet comfort of being seen in a way he hadn't been in years. Angela's presence was gentle and steady, never demanding, never trying to impress, but that only made James more uneasy. He'd seen this before. Attention, smiles that turned into interviews, invitations that morphed into ambushes. Since becoming James Alden, billionaire CEO, people saw him as a headline, not a man. After his wife died, the vultures came, reporters posing as friends, women who smiled too much, too soon. Angela wasn't like them, and yet the fear lingered. What if he was wrong again? One evening, he invited her to dinner, not at his mansion, but at a cozy, family-owned Italian restaurant on the outskirts of town. Rosie had begged, and Angela had agreed with her usual kindness. They sat at a tucked-away table in a quiet corner. Rosie colored happily between them with crayons. James watched as Angela helped his daughter draw a sun with sunglasses. She wore a soft navy blouse, her golden curls loosely tied back. She was beautiful, yes, but it was her calm that captivated him. Still, the doubts lingered. When Rosie went with a waitress to wash her hands, James leaned forward. "Miss Evans," he began. "Angela," she corrected gently. "I think we've shared enough cookies and sick days to drop the formalities." He paused, then asked, "Do you know who I am?" Angela blinked, then smiled faintly. "I know your name, I know what you do. I know people probably talk about you more than they listen to you." James looked at her, surprised. She continued, soft but firm, "But none of that matters to me. What matters is you're Rosie's dad, and I see a man trying to be her hero, even when he's scared he's not enough. That's the man who matters to me." He leaned back, stunned by her sincerity. No flattery, no curiosity about his net worth, just honesty. It moved him more than he expected. Still, he held back. Old wounds don't close easily. A few days later, that distance shattered. It was near noon when Angela noticed Rosie wasn't herself. The girl was quiet, pale, not touching her crayons. Angela gently touched her forehead, and her heart flipped. It was burning. Without hesitation, she scooped Rosie up and rushed to the school office. She called James as the nurse tried to help, but Rosie whimpered, clinging to her. This wasn't a mild fever. Angela didn't wait. She buckled Rosie into her car and sped to the nearest children's hospital. James arrived 20 minutes later. His eyes scanned the waiting room until he found them. Angela seated on a bench, holding Rosie's sleeping body. Her arms cradled the girl close. Her eyes were red. He hurried over. "What happened?" Angela looked up, voice breaking. She was burning up. "I couldn't wait. I'm sorry I didn't ask. I just had to." James didn't speak. He sat beside her, his suit damp from the rain. Rosie was stable now, asleep in her arms. Angela looked down. She'd been terrified. And in that moment, James saw the truth. Not a teacher doing her job, not a woman seeking his attention, just someone who loved his daughter deeply and fiercely. Slowly, he reached over and took her hand, no words, no grand gestures, just his hand warm and firm on hers. Angela looked at him, startled by the touch, and in his eyes, she saw what words couldn't say. Gratitude, trust, and the start of something real. It started with a click, just one photo snapped from behind a bush near the city zoo. James, Angela, and little Rosie walking hand in hand under the fading sunlight. Rosie held a half-eaten cotton candy in one hand, the other gripped tightly to Angela's. James carried a stuffed panda he'd won at a game booth. It was innocent, a spontaneous after-school outing, unplanned and sweet, but the world didn't see it that way. By morning, the headline was everywhere. Billionaire CEO James Alden spotted with mystery woman. Sources say she's a kindergarten teacher. The photos went viral, media speculated, blogs questioned motives, forums dissected Angela's life. Who was she? After money? Love or something calculated? Angela had never been in the spotlight and hated every second. The next morning, the school principal called her into the office. The words were gentle but firm. "Angela, you've been a wonderful teacher," the principal said. "But we've gotten calls from concerned parents, even reporters. There's worry about professionalism and public image." Angela's throat tightened. "I never wanted this to happen." "We know, but maybe take a short leave until things calm down." She nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course." Later, alone in her car, her hands shook. She didn't blame the school. She blamed herself for not drawing a firmer line, for letting her feelings grow. That night, Angela sat on the floor of her small apartment, modest and warm. The space reflected her. Low bookshelves, paper flowers, a wall of crayon drawings from her students. Notes read things like, "Thanks for hugging me when I cried," and "You make school happy." She smiled at them, eyes misty. A soft knock broke the silence. She opened the door, and there was James, soaked from the rain, suit wet, hair dripping. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man coming undone. "I'm sorry," he said, voice ragged. Angela blinked. "What are you doing here?" "I saw the headlines," he murmured. "I saw what it did to you." She stepped aside without a word. He entered slowly, his eyes scanning her home. The handmade decorations, soft colors, lived in peace. It was the opposite of his stark mansion. His gaze landed on a box labeled letters. He opened it and read a few. "Dear Miss Angela, I wish you were my mommy too. Love, Riley. Miss Angela, thanks for holding my hand. I'm not scared of the dark anymore." He sat, still holding the notes. Angela stayed standing, arms crossed, not defensive, just cautious. "I didn't stand up for you," James said quietly. "I let people twist your image, while I stayed silent. I told myself it was to protect Rosie, but really, I was scared. Scared you were like everyone else." She met his eyes. "And now?" He stood and walked toward her. "I was wrong." The rain pounded steadily on the windows as he approached. His face was tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much for too long. "You're not just someone Rosie adores. You're not a rumor. You're the woman who brought laughter back to my daughter's life and reminded me what hope feels like." Angela's breath caught. James turned to the door, opened it, letting in the wind and rain, but before stepping out, he looked back. "I should have trusted you," he said. "I should have stood by you." Then he left. Angela followed barefoot under the awning, watching him stand in the downpour. "James," she called. He turned. "You're soaked," she said softly. He gave her a tired smile. "Some things," he said, "are worth getting rained on." Angela's return to Maplewood Kindergarten was quiet, but the welcome she received was anything but. As she walked through the doors, students ran to hug her legs, their excited voices overlapping. Parents approached with smiles and warm words. "We missed you. My daughter cried every night without you. Please don't ever leave again." Angela held back tears. The place she'd feared would reject her had embraced her like family. At the next parent-teacher meeting, the room hushed as James stood. He adjusted his jacket and turned to the group, not as a CEO, but as a father. "I'd like to say something," he began, voice steady but sincere. "There have been rumors lately, and I stayed silent longer than I should have. That silence cost someone I care about deeply." He looked at Angela, seated quietly in the back. "Miss Evans has been more than a teacher. She's been a light in my daughter's life, and in mine. I owe her a public apology and my deepest gratitude." The room stayed silent for a beat. Then applause broke out, tentative at first, then full. Angela smiled. A quiet nod of thanks passed between them across the room. Their first official date came soon after. It wasn't anything grand, just dinner at a small, cozy bistro tucked between bookstores. The kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. A single candle flickered between them, and outside the window, rain tapped gently on the glass. They talked about everything and nothing. Angela shared stories of childhood, scraped knees, and library adventures. James spoke of building toy robots in his garage before tech investors knew his name. For the first time in years, he laughed, really laughed, not out of politeness, but from a place that hadn't felt joy in so long. As they stepped out into the cool night air, James offered his coat. Angela took it without a word, their hands brushing as she draped it over her shoulders. That moment, though small, felt like something clicking into place. A few days later, Rosie handed them a drawing she'd made at school. In bright crayon lines, 3 figures stood under a rainbow, Rosie in the middle, holding hands with James and Angela. Above it she'd written, "My family." James held the paper for a long moment. His throat tightened. That night, as Angela tucked Rosie into bed during a sleepover at the Aldens' home, the little girl looked up and whispered, "Good night, Mommy." Angela froze. Rosie smiled sleepily, eyes half closed. "Can I call you that?" Angela's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, leaning down to kiss Rosie's forehead. In the doorway, James watched silently. Later, sitting side by side in the quiet living room, James took her hand. "I never thought I'd love again," he said softly. "Not after everything. But then you came into our lives, quietly, with kindness, and suddenly everything felt possible again." Angela rested her head on his shoulder. "I didn't plan any of this," she whispered. "But now I can't imagine life without it." Outside, stars twinkled silently overhead. Inside, two hearts began beating a little closer. And in the next room, a little girl dreamed under her rainbow drawing, safe, loved, and finally home. Rosie's kindergarten graduation morning bloomed with soft sunlight and the bustle of proud parents filling the schoolyard. Colorful balloons floated near the stage, and rows of chairs lined the grass. The kids wore tiny blue caps and gowns, giggling as they tried to stay in line. Angela stood by the stage, clipboard in hand, making sure everything ran smoothly. Her golden curls were softly pinned back, and she wore a pale peach dress that Rosie had picked because it looks like sunshine. James arrived early, dressed in a simple charcoal suit, no tie. He exchanged greetings with some parents, nodded to the principal, but his eyes stayed fixed on Angela. As the ceremony began, proud tears flowed. The kids sang, laughed, and accepted their certificates with wide grins. Rosie, of course, stole the show when she recited her poem and ended with, "Thank you, Miss Angela, for being my teacher and my favorite grown-up." Laughter and warm applause followed. Then the principal returned to the mic. "Before we wrap up," she said, "one of our parents would like to say a few words." James stepped onto the small wooden stage. Sunlight lit his face, revealing a hint of nerves. He took a deep breath and looked at the crowd, then straight at Angela. "My daughter Rosie," he began, "lost her mom when she was 3. I thought the best way to protect her was to build walls, keep the world out, guard my heart. But someone came along who didn't just teach Rosie the alphabet or how to tie her shoes. She taught her to trust again." He paused, his voice now softer. "And without meaning to, she taught me too." The audience went quiet. Angela's eyes widened. Rosie sat in the front row, legs swinging, eyes fixed on her dad. James stepped off the mic and walked toward Angela at the side of the stage. "I didn't know what love could look like after loss," he continued. "I didn't think I'd ever feel safe enough to try again." In front of dozens of parents, teachers, and kids, he reached into his pocket and knelt on one knee. Gasps filled the yard. "Angela Evans," he said, emotion thick in his voice. "You taught my daughter to love with her whole heart. Will you teach me the same for the rest of my life?" Angela's hand flew to her mouth as tears sprang to her eyes. She nodded once, twice, then whispered, "Yes." Applause erupted. Rosie squealed with joy and ran to hug Angela from behind, wrapping her arms tight around her waist. "Mommy Angela," she laughed. Angela turned and knelt to hug her, tears falling freely. James joined them, arms around both, his forehead gently against Angela's. It wasn't a perfect moment. It was better. It was real. It was earned. It was family. A year later, under the same old oak in the schoolyard, a small wedding took place. Angela walked down a short path lined with paper flowers, her dress simple and elegant. Rosie held the bouquet, grinning ear to ear. The guests were mostly kids, parents, and teachers, people who'd witnessed this love grow from quiet beginnings. James waited under a wooden arch. His eyes never left her. Their vows were soft, full of pauses, honesty, and hope. From loss, James said, voice trembling, "You helped me find my way back to love." They kissed as the kids cheered, and Rosie, now 5, stood proudly between them, tossing petals into the air like confetti. As the sun began to set, the 3 walked hand in hand through the yard. Rosie skipped between them, swinging their hands with glee. Angela looked at her, then at James, who smiled like a man finally at peace. And Rosie, light as air, full of laughter, twirled across the grass, a little girl dancing between her mother and father under a sky that finally felt whole. Thanks for joining us on this heartfelt journey of love and healing. If this story touched you, please like, comment, and share it with someone who still believes in love after loss. For more heartwarming tales that warm your soul, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to support Tales of Kindness. Your support means the world to us. It keeps the stories alive and hearts connected. Until next time, take care, love deeply, and never stop believing in real connection. Stories that heal, stories that endure. Blind date turned job interview.